Well, I'm really excited to be here this morning for you, night for this is Annalise, and she's my god sister. So we haven't seen
Yes,
each other since I don't know, gosh, how old? I
make
don't know,
ends.
like making paper clothes when we were 7 or 8.
Yep, yep, long time.
It really has. But you are a mom all over the world. So just, yeah, give us a little bit of a backstory about where you grew up, where we grew up, and I
Yep.
guess what made you want to raise your girls in so many different places.
Yeah, so I'm an only child, and as you know, and grew up on the Gold Coast in Australia, and then moved to the little mining town where we were living together as little kids, 1,500 people. Moved there when I was in primary school, and then was sort of back and forth between that part of Australia and the big town of the Gold Coast for the rest of my life. But I always knew that I wanted to travel. So I have this very distinct memory actually of being, I would say 4 or 5. It's one of my earliest really strong memories. And um, we were in our little crappy car, me and my mum driving home from school one day. She's a teacher. She was a teacher. And we were driving home from school today, and we pulled up at these lights with the afternoon sun setting just ahead of us. And I remember looking right into the sun, directly into the sun, and seeing shapes of landmarks that now I know, now as an adult, it was like the Eiffel Tower. It was like Big Ben sort of shapes. So I just knew from a young age, and I don't know where it came from because no one really where we grew up traveled much. I don't remember knowing anyone when we were kids who even had a passport. So I don't know where it came from, but I always knew I'd go. Um, and even I went to boarding school for high school because there was no high school in the town where we grew up.
Where did
And
you
my
go to
mum
boarding school?
in Rockhampton.
Okay.
Yeah, so the closest high school where we grew up was where my mum taught, and I didn't want to be at the same school where my mum was teaching. So I went away to boarding school, and uh, I was and Rockhampton is very, especially when we were growing up, there weren't a lot of non-Australians there. It was
Such a
very
big
monocultural.
city. I remember. Oh my God, look at it now. It's so small. Rocky's so small. But I'm like, when we were kids, it was so
It was
big.
the
Like it
big.
had a KFC.
Yeah, and they had Sizzler, and it was like a big deal to go to Rocky. But it was very monocultural from what I remember. But I still had this drive to travel, and so like my favorite subject at school was French. I had no connection to France or the French language, but it was my favorite subject. So much so that I actually wanted to quit school in year 10. I was luckily a really good student, but having a hard time in my, mentally with growing up. I wanted to quit school, and I only stayed because of my French teacher, who I really respected and who really cared for me, and who said, you can't quit school. Also, my mum said, there's no way you could quit school. But, so I've always had this connection to wanting to be elsewhere. Um, I was 16, and I found, it was pre-internet days because that's how old I am. I went into the library at school and found a Chinese dictionary. I have no idea why. I have nothing to do with China or Chinese, but I looked up the characters for the word self-trust. And then I went as a 16-year-old and got them tattooed on my foot, as a symbol to myself that I would always trust where my feet would take me, and I trusted that my feet would take me places. So I just had this drive to always to go. So I finished school and really had no idea what I wanted to do. I got excellent marks because I was fortunate enough to know how to work the system. And so I chose subjects that got me great marks for not much effort. Um, but I didn't apply for university, much to the distaste of my school and the teachers there. Refused to apply for
That's
university.
really going against the grain, because I think Australia's always been a little bit different than the US in the sense that you don't have to go to, well, we could say college here, but it is expected, especially if you get good marks. That's the track to, making a decent life for yourself. And the fact that you didn't apply, really, yeah, that's really ballsy.
Yeah. So because travel was all I knew I wanted to do, I thought, well, the next best thing would be to work in travel. So I got a job working in a travel agency, and quickly found out that, I wasn't going to earn much money back in those days. As a fresh, unqualified, unskilled travel agent, I was barely making enough to make ends meet, but working 45 hours a week. So I got a bad taste in my mouth and thought, oh, well, maybe I actually do need a degree so I can support myself to do what I want to do. So, gee, this is a long-winded story of explaining why I wanted to go overseas. Anyway, I heard of some scholarships going at university to do communication, actually, because I loved the humanities, I loved writing, I loved literature. I thought maybe I could do something in that field. I still wasn't particularly driven. So I got a scholarship to go to university and did my Bachelor of Communication. Still didn't feel particularly drawn to anything, so took off to the UK after I graduated, and did the whole sort of working backpacker thing for a while over there. Really, really loved it, and then came home and fell into business banking, sort of. I don't know why. I just fell into it, and it was fine. But always had my eyes still on being overseas. So fast forward, I met my husband, and we started. We met at a bar at closing time, a bar called the Swing and Safari on the Gold Coast.
On Gold Coast, okay.
Long gone now. So we met there at closing time, and it was love at first sight. And we moved back out west to the mining town, so out to Emerald. I just still knew we had to go. We had to go. So some friends I got into teaching along the way as well, starting my teaching career, and had some friends who moved to China to work in an international school. Caught up with them on holidays. They raved about it. And we said, hey, let's throw our hat in the ring and let's just see where this takes us. So landed a job in China, just outside Shanghai. And our girls were 4 and 6 when we moved, and we haven't looked back.
So, and did you have your girls in Queensland, or where were they born?
Yeah, on the Gold Coast, both born on the Gold Coast.
And did you always know that you wanted to sort of be a traveling family, or was it something you thought you might just, travel 2 weeks out of the year, or did you always have the idea of actually going and living in different places?
Always wanted to live elsewhere. Yeah, I didn't know how. When children are really little and life gets busy, and I was still working with little kids. I had a husband who was working shift work. Suddenly the years just sped up, and so the dream slipped to the background a little bit. But it was always sort of sitting on my shoulder that I just didn't feel like I fit at home. It felt like I was meant to be elsewhere. So, and then the opportunity came up, and we haven't looked back.
So first stop was Shanghai, just outside Shanghai.
Just outside Shanghai.
Yeah, it's a beautiful age actually, the 4 and 6, because they can sort of take it all in and they're out of diapers and, having to be very dependent and they have a little bit more independence. So that's actually like a really, I would think, a beautiful age to start that journey.
Yeah, it was. And fortunately, where we were, there was a really strong expat community with a lot of kids similar ages. And so we really sort of felt a strong sense of community. Um, and I looking back, I even wonder if because we were families who had children of similar ages, we were in a country where language is really hard, and it got easier over time. But when we first got there, it was a little bit difficult and challenging to be an expat in our city. We really banded together. And so our children sort of grew up together. We all went through the ages and stages together in as tight, or maybe even a tighter way, as probably being at home, because we had this, I would say, this shared sense of being in it together and being away from our families, our support networks, even our government, in terms of the support provisions that are available to you. So we really banded together, and it was a really special time to have the kids little abroad.
Did they go through culture shock, or did they adapt easier than you did? What was that sort of initial experience of being somewhere so different?
Uh, I think particularly my youngest daughter, Sunny, she was 4 when we left. I think she was so little that it didn't really register to her. Um, my eldest daughter, Sage, who was 6, she had started school in Australia. So I think changing schools was a little bit challenging for her at first. But we didn't really, we did experience like an environmental culture shock, because, when we first got to China, the pollution was next level. And so I would say the girls, not so much in terms of, uh, yeah, they were very flexible and adaptable. But my husband and I really went through a period of going, what have we done? Because when we first got to China, we had never heard of AQI. We didn't know what air quality index meant. And then we got to China, and I remember driving from the airport from the Shanghai airport to our city. And we were looking at the window going, is there like a film on these windows on the car? The sky was so grey. Everything was so grey. And that first year we got pretty sick, a lot of respiratory stuff. So that was a shock to us. Despite that, by the time we left China, they had done an amazing job of cleaning up in our city. And we were there for nearly 6 years. So we saw it change, but that was a shock. That was a shock, more so for my husband and I, just wondering what we'd done. Had we made the right choice to bring our children from, we were on a 1/4 acre block, with a trampoline in the backyard.
Beautiful area, mind you.
Blue skies, no pollution. I'm sure there was pollution, but, it wasn't something we really talked about in Australia back then. And then to go to that, we really did wonder, have we done the right thing by the girls?
And
So
is there
that was.
Yeah, was there a point when you went, oh, this was the right thing, where it clicked?
Yeah, I think the second year. We fell out, we fell into our groove, we found our people. For me, moving from the Australian system to an IB system of education, that
Tell me a little
was
bit about the IB situation. What is the IB?
So the IB is the International Baccalaureate. So it's an international curriculum, and there are there are four programs, but most schools will run 3 of them. So there's the primary years program, PYP, that goes up to grade 5. Then there's the middle years program for 6 to 9. And then there's, or some schools run it up higher. And then you've got the diploma program, the DP, which a lot of international schools run. Some international schools will run all 3, but a lot of international schools run the DP, which is the final 2-year program, which is really commonly recognised among universities around the world, and an easier way for expat kids to open more doors to universities. So the schools I've worked in have been IB schools with those 3 programs running, which was really different to the Australian curriculum that I was used to working in. So it took me some time to settle into that.
You say what you think is better, or is it, what you would choose, what you, having had that experience, what you feel gives a better education?
Well, I don't have as much experience as your mum, of course, in education. This is my 18th year working in education.
That's a chunk of time.
It's a chunk of time. I've held different roles in school. So I started out as a high school English history teacher. I moved into learning support. I've got a real passion for inclusion of kids with additional educational needs. My own daughters have additional educational needs. And now I'm a school counsellor. So I've seen different areas of schools and how they work. Personally, I think the power in education comes from the teacher. A curriculum is, a sort of framework for how and what we teach kids, but the power comes from the person who's teaching. And I don't think anyone is necessarily better or worse than the other. I think it's about what's the best fit for different children with different needs. So, for example, I think about my girls. My girls have both been diagnosed with ADHD. My eldest daughter has some learning disabilities that go with that. When I'm thinking about schools for her, I'm not really considering the curriculum so much as what support provisions are available to her and what kind of differentiation are the teachers in the school comfortable and able to provide. That's where the power comes, I think, from me, is how supportive is the school environment, not so much what is the curriculum they're running, what support are they able to provide, and how inclusive is the learning environment. That's what's important to me.
Did you find, so their experience of going to school in those early days in China, is there anything that really stood out that surprised you, that of sort of how things kind of operated?
I had thought, from working in Australian only Queensland schools, I had thought that international schools were the cream of the crop. I thought that that's where the most innovative, effective, inclusive, progressive teaching and learning would be happening. And what surprised me is I found that schools are schools. And this is where I come back to the power of the teacher, and the ethos of the school is what's really important, because international schools are still just schools. Some of them are fantastic. Some of them put a lot of money into professional development of their staff. Some of them are really focused on being progressive and inclusive. Some are not. Some are really profit-driven. And so I was fortunate that my school in China was more on the progressive and inclusive side and really trying to make a difference. But what I saw and what I've seen, being on the circuit for a few years, at first it surprised me because I was naive, I think. Um, we talk in Australia about having a bit of a cultural cringe and thinking that we're really backwards, and that everywhere else is so much better and forward thinking than we were. And it surprised me to go, oh wow, some of these are really crap schools, and not that progressive. So that surprised me. For the girls, they were little. They were flexible and adaptable. I think that my eldest daughter especially had some trouble, but she would have had trouble in any setting. Because of the nature of school is hard for a kid with ADHD and learning disabilities, wherever they are. So she had some challenges that would have happened in any place that we had been in. We were fortunate that our international school that we were at in China was actually more inclusive of her than the school we'd been at in Australia, where she started school. So yeah.
Kind of what was sort of the after school programs? Did parents, I think in the US and Australia, there's always, a big push to be in lots of after school kind of things. Is that the case in China, or how did you sort of approach the co-curricular activities?
So that can be culturally dependent too. So for example, well, every international school I've been at. So we started in China, we moved to Cambodia, we then went to Bali, now we're here in Malaysia. And across
You've been on the
board,
road for 8 years?
Nearly 9 years now. And, international schools overwhelmingly will have their staff offer at least one activity after school a day. The school I'm at the moment has a huge CCA, or cross-curricular activity program, where there are staff offering programs, there are external service providers coming into school to offer after-school programs as well. But then there are also, so my experience has been all in Asia, and there can be a lot of expectation from some parents that their children will go to school and then will do a lot of additional schooling, whether it be tutoring or like formal after school educational centres. So for me, we don't enroll our girls in any sort of formal after school tuition. They do some sports, they do some dance, but I have worked with some kids, some little kids too, who would do a full day of school and then who would go to an academy or a tutoring place for another maybe 4 hours of an evening, and then have homework to do as well as that. So it's interesting.
And I think I was talking to someone about this yesterday, but I remember even as a child just feeling so much stress and anxiety about having to do, school and then dance and then this and having to excel in everything, excel in sport that I really had no business doing, but it was this drive that I had. And I think back to that and how that, gave how it took me a long time, even as an adult, to figure out how to deal with stress, how to regulate the anxiety, and know when it, was useful and when it wasn't. I think I found that place now. It's always imperfect, but I think of Raven, and I think that if I could do anything, it would just to be a child, not have this. There's so much time for that later in life, but just be a child is what I want for her more than anything. It's to be very much away from that hustle culture that I think permeates, and I don't think it does kids or adults any favors.
I agree, and I feel very fortunate that my girls are Australian and that university pathways are really open to them. Whereas, you know, some of my friends who come from Asian countries and whose children are looking at Asian universities to get into, some of them are incredibly competitive, you know, and these poor kids, it's almost like my girls, the bare minimum is here, you know, and they will get into a university. Absolutely, they will. There's always a way in. But for some of my friends from other countries, the bare minimum is here. And those kids, you know, are up against, it's so competitive, you know. So I feel fortunate that my girls don't have that level of competition that they need to strive to get into somewhere. And I feel for some of these kids who's some parents really, really push them, you know, for many different reasons. But I feel for some of the parents who actually don't agree with the level of rigor and pressure, but who also feel sort of torn that they want to give their children the best opportunities in life, and they feel like the only way to do that is to have them maintaining this level.
That's a good point, because I think, you know, maybe it is privilege to not have to worry, be so stressed about their future kind of thing, knowing that it will work out. And Raven too, she's got Australian and American passports, and so she has a lot of you know, regardless of money, she just has a lot of opportunity at some point, whether she chooses that path or not. So yeah, it is in these Asian countries. I can only imagine the pressure that's on parents and kids to forge somehow a better path in life. And yeah, that's tough. It's tough.
Right kindergarten, the right school, the right after school programs, the right, you know, the whole package. It needs to be very carefully curated for some of the families, and it's a lot of pressure.
It is. How did you find in all the different countries dealing with the language barrier? Obviously, you know, international school, but outside of school, day-to-day life, did the girls sort of learn the basics? How did you navigate that?
It's funny because just tonight I took my youngest daughter, Sunny, and we went and got a manicure. And the lovely nail technicians speak Mandarin. And my daughter, Sunny, who was 4 when we moved to China, picked up Mandarin like that. And we often say, you know, in a past life, this child was absolutely from China, because she thrived. She remembers, she still grieves China, and we left China in 2021. She still grieves the place. She just very naturally fell into the language. It sort of, it came naturally to her without effort. It was much more difficult for my older daughter and almost impossible for my husband and I. So for my husband and I, we would rely on Sunny to translate for us when we were out and about. This, you know, little blonde-haired, chubby, white, very, very pale-skinned little Aussie girl who would help to say, Mum, they're asking you for this, or, you know. So we would rely on her. Or we used translation apps. So we were not good expats, I would say, in terms of we didn't force ourselves to learn the language, not in any country we've lived in, because we didn't need to. We could get around with our very basic rudimentary vocab, and anything else we had Sunny, or we had our translator apps. And then in Cambodia, English was more widely spoken, and certainly in Bali and now in Malaysia too. We haven't needed the language, but it is something I grimace a bit at. I carry a little bit of guilt that we should have tried a little bit harder.
You know, it is hard. It's hard. Even for me, like as a war reporter, I try to learn basics. I was really good at Arabic at one point in my life. It's kind of gone now because I haven't been keeping it up. But I always say, yes, language skills are absolutely amazing, especially when you're a kid and you can learn them. That's such a gift. I wish I'd had that. But at the end of the day, I have so many other things that I need to focus on in terms of
Yeah.
dynamics, setting up interviews, whatever it may be. I'm probably always going to use the translator, even if I felt that I was fluent in language, because every dialect, every region you go is so different, and I don't want to miss anything. So I had to just accept that if I could figure out a few basics everywhere, great. But it wasn't going to be my priority. And it is not as an adult, it really is. And again, that was one of my just, wishes in life is I'd learn any language kind of fluently when I was younger. Because like you said, that's just amazing that Sunny she just was a sponge. She picked it up.
She just picked it up, and oh, it's amazing here in Penang. People are so multilingual, and it's almost like it's no big thing, Whereas when we grew up, especially where we grew up, no one really spoke a second language. I don't even remember if Thierry Primary School, if we even did a second language.
Remember there was a French teacher that was there, and I remember, she taught us a few phrases, bonjour, je suis, and I never, just the few little phrases she taught us, I remember out of maybe one or two classes. I don't know what happened to her, but I remember, yeah, hearing her speak and thinking, oh my gosh, that's so exotic and beautiful and amazing, and yeah, just being
Yeah,
enamored by
I
that.
yes, and it seemed exotic, right? It seems so sophisticated and amazing. And then I work with kids here who are like they speak four languages, and they're learning like watching K dramas or something, and they're teaching themselves Korean, and it's just sort of a throwaway expected thing, and it's fascinating to me, and I love it. I just think it's so incredible, the
Do you
multilingualism.
think is a good age to start a child in a second language? How young is too young, or when can they kind of comprehend it?
I don't know. Early childhood is not my specialty. What I've observed just anecdotally from, watching friends with really little kids grow up with maybe a local helper in the house or childminder is they pick it up almost inherently, is what I saw. And I think the younger the better. But I also think an element is the child's disposition and capacity for an additional language. Some kids, it's just not their thing, not in their wheelhouse. Other kids will sponge it up.
Take it in. So in moving to Cambodia, did did they have the same language? Did Sunny sort of pick it up the same, or being a little bit older, it wasn't quite the same?
Yeah, no, Cambodia is such a fascinating place, so um, generally speaking, in international schools, the students will be offered the choice to learn the host country language. But at our school in Cambodia, Khmer wasn't available to foreigners. So they only taught Khmer as mother tongue language. It wasn't
Such a
available.
beautiful language. Oh,
Yeah, so it wasn't available to the girls as a language acquisition. And then their friends, who were mostly Cambodian, mostly Cambodian, were more comfortable speaking English than Khmer. So they weren't really exposed to the Khmer language. Some songs, some small little snippets of conversation, but they just didn't pick up much. They didn't pick up any Khmer at all.
your life kind of like in Cambodia, and again, what was sort of the activities that you did on weekends, and how did you immerse the girls in the culture?
We were really fortunate because we moved to Cambodia with some very dear friends who we worked with in China, who had children as well. So we moved together to work at the same school. We lived in the same street. So we sort of came as a package, and we already had some dear friends built into our life by the time we got there. And as is often the case in international education, it's a very small world. So then we also met people who had worked at the same school we'd been at in China before we got there. We knew people in common. So we established a little network and community as well. Spent a lot of time with those friends. The girls made friends and just were, it was a lot of play dates, a lot of sleepovers. They did some dance classes. We really liked, we were fortunate, we were only in Cambodia for 2 years, but we were fortunate to do some travel in Cambodia, which was really lovely. But I would say, you know, Phnom Penh and the school we were at probably weren't representative of Cambodia as a whole, and nowhere really is representative of any country as a whole, I'd say. But yeah, it was a pretty normal life, just play dates and sleepovers and stuff, just with really different kids to what we were used to in China. Our international school had a lot of foreign kids, a lot of there was a big Bosch plant, so there were a lot of German families there. There was a Samsung plant, so there were a lot of Korean families there. Whereas our school in Cambodia was largely Cambodian kids, you know, from Cambodian government families, from prominent Cambodian businesses. So it was a different mix of friends there. But yeah, it's a fascinating place to live.
Did you feel any, I mean, I asked this just from my background, but obviously as a country that went through a very, very brutal war not that long ago, do you feel like is there a sense of that carries through just in general society, in the way people live and the way they function and how they approach life is sort of a, do you see remnants of that war in life now?
Yes, yeah. I think especially in my role working in mental health with young people, so working as a school counsellor, you know, the remnants of the trauma are still very, very, very present, very alive. It was a deep privilege and a real honour to work with those young people, because they were very wealthy, you know, very wealthy families that came to our school. But by and large, the students had this real sense of awareness of their wealth and privilege. You know, they would be the kids who would be driving in a Rolls Royce to school along the streets of Phnom Penh, where there are often children begging on the side of the road. You know, so the extremes of poverty and privilege are really evident there. But I hadn't expected the kids to be so aware of it. I hadn't expected the young people to be so aware of their own privilege, and in a really positive way where they wanted to make a change or give back. So the trauma as well is still really present, and the effect that has had on families, I think, will track down some generations to come. But it was a deep privilege of mine to work there. The people, those students and the people that I met there were really lovely, really heartfelt people who are stoic and proud, and who have been through unspeakable pain and trauma. Mm.
How, I guess, seeing the way that other people live, people have experienced that, and, often the poverty, how has that shaped your girls in their outlook on things? How have you seen that impact them?
I think straight away of this experience with my oldest daughter Sage, who's a very sensitive little soul. Sage feels things big, and I remember when we first moved to Cambodia, it was 2021, and hotel quarantine was still a thing. So we once did 4 weeks of hotel quarantine in China.
God
And
bless
then
you.
moving to Cambodia was 2 weeks. 2 weeks hotel quarantine. And we would fortunately, we had a balcony on our room, and we were right in the middle of Phnom Penh on a very busy sort of roundabout in the middle of town. And we could see all of life going, all the busy hubble bubble going along beneath us. And we could see a lot of young kids begging. And, when the red lights would come and the traffic would pull up, they'd come out and they'd be weaving their way through traffic to beg. And I remember one day we were out on the balcony and we were looking down, and we saw some little kids who were naked and had no clothes on walking through the traffic begging. And my daughter burst into tears and was so distraught by what she was seeing. And we had travelled to Cambodia before, and we've travelled a lot around Southeast Asia, and we've seen how, different levels of socioeconomic life. But this was her first time of seeing little kids, not so different from her in terms of age. It was her first time seeing that, and it really shook her. But I think that there was also a powerful positive experience too, because we were separated from it. We were up on the balcony, we couldn't get out, we were stuck. We really had an observer's standpoint, so we could look without being right in it. I think that could have been hard for her if we'd been plummeted straight into being on the ground and in the streets and having all that around her. And she also developed a real sense of her own privilege. And so what I've seen in my girls, my youngest daughter and I, before bed every night, we talk about 3 things we're grateful for from the day. And my youngest daughter will often say that I have good teachers and I have a great education. Because I think through our travel and through our movements around, what we've seen is that a lot of kids aren't afforded that same opportunity that they have. So I hope, and I like to think, that they've developed a real appreciation for especially education, and that not everyone has that same access. And so another thing, going back to the IB, the International Baccalaureate that we were talking about earlier, is there's a real focus on service learning. And, the UN's sustainable development goals, and our schools that we've been at have really tried to encourage the students to think about those and to think about ways that they can make those more alive in their life. And it sounds sort of trite, but I don't think it is. And I hope the girls have developed appreciation for that.
Yeah, I think that's just it's such an incredible gift to give children, just an awareness of the world, especially growing up in, these beautiful first world places. And it's hard to imagine how most of the world doesn't live like that when that's all you know. And it's just, it's such an eye-opening gift, I think. And that's that's something that's very much on my radar of above everything, wanting Raven to see that and understand that and be grateful that she doesn't have to, endure that, but just be very aware of the world around us. And that's something that, that's hard to teach. I think it's something that you have to experience in some way. And again, it's a privilege to be able to experience it. So it's
Yeah.
it's difficult, but I think, yeah, if you can impart that sort of empathy is yeah, it's just such a gift and something I struggle with, in so many countries. I just got back from India, but whether it's Afghanistan or Mexico or India, wherever it is, so much of the world, and you do have that begging, that the tap, tap, tap on the car door everywhere you're stopped, and you have to kind of compartmentalize because you can't, give money to everybody. And often these poor children are kind of part of these mafia rings as well, where they're not actually they're not profiting from the money that they're being given. So you don't want to incentivize that, but it's so hard. And I still wonder, like, how I will explain that to Raven at some point, why I'm not giving this poor little girl who's very tiny and clearly needs to eat money. And that it still shatters me now, is like, yeah, having to not even look at them. I wish there was an easier way to deal with it.
Yeah, we did expect that too, with the girl saying, "Mum, why aren't you giving them money?" And then having to explain that there are some adults who make kids do that, and the kids don't get the money, but the adults take the money. That's hard for a little kid to understand, and can be a bit of a rude awakening about how the world can work. So yeah, we definitely went through that too. Mm.
And then what was the move to Bali like?
The move to Bali was a lesson in flexibility, I would say, a lesson in letting go of long. So we've loved Bali forever. My husband's been going there to surf for 30 years or so.
I was gonna say, I'm sure he was in heaven in Bali.
Yeah. I came to Bali later. It didn't interest me at all until my husband said, "No, let's go." And I saw that there was so much more than Kuta. I thought Bali was basically Kuta. So, God, we've loved Bali for years, and it was our dream to somehow get there one day. And we didn't know how. And but we held the dream. And then out of nowhere, an opportunity came to buy land in Bali, or lease land in Bali for a steal in our little sort of quiet little spot in Bali that we loved, away from the hustle. So we grabbed this opportunity, and we were living in Cambodia at the time, thought we'd be there a long time, and this opportunity came out of nowhere, and we thought, we have to do this. We have one life. An opportunity like this doesn't roll around sometimes ever. My husband is a builder by trade, and we thought, we have an opportunity to start a business and create a different life for our family. We'd been used to, me working, and my husband was what we call a trailing spouse, who did some boxing coaching along the way. This came out of nowhere. So we flipped our whole lives upside down and sold everything and put everything into building a business in Bali and building a home to live in Bali. But we got to Bali, and very quickly I could see that this wouldn't work. Bali had changed a lot. The level of development in the place is mind-boggling and upsetting for me. And I didn't feel comfortable living in Bali. And I know that holidaying and living in places is very different. But I was unprepared for how uncomfortable I felt living there. It felt like the wrong fit.
In what way were you uncomfortable?
I was uncomfortable with the level of construction and overdevelopment. The island, infrastructure isn't fantastic there, but the level of construction and development is astronomical. Astronomical. There's not enough water. In our part of the island where we built, there's not enough water. There's the erosion of the cliffs. There was a landslide from a development gone wrong. I felt conflicted, to be honest with you. I felt a little bit like I was contributing to something I didn't agree with and didn't like. And I was also concerned about the educational opportunities available for my children there.
Was it about there?
Yeah, I couldn't see a good space where they would fit educationally.
International school, that wasn't a thing there.
There's a couple there. There's a couple that I would have considered, but where we were building, there was not. I think it would be at least an hour commute each way if the traffic was okay, and the costs. If I wasn't working at the school, the costs would have been impossible. So very, very quickly, we were faced with this, oh my God moment of this dream that we've held so tightly for so long and then fell into our laps is actually not, it's not right for us. And it was a very challenging year, a really hard year where, looking back, I can see I grew a lot, but I went through some shocking anxiety. I went through
Because you committed to buying the land and you sort of, I mean, that's the sense of being tied to something and knowing it's not right.
And moving my children again, like being the new kids again, and then suddenly going, oh, this isn't going to work. We're going to have to go again. I felt very guilty. I felt really conflicted. I felt confused too. I felt shocked because this is what I'd always wanted. And suddenly it was here and we were creating it and it didn't feel right. And we just kept having to pivot. And then, the money that we thought we could use to build this thing, it wouldn't have been enough. We had so many troubles with our builders. And so we just had to continue pivoting, being really light on our feet while still, I was working, the girls were at school, my husband was on the job site 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, just trying to watch things. He couldn't work in Bali, so he couldn't build, but he was just watching and keeping an eye on how things were going. So so we were only in Bali for a year, and then on the move again. So it was a very challenging year, but I can look back and see what I took from it. The further away I get from it, the more I can look back and see how I can take lessons from it. It still feels quite raw. I still carry some guilt that I moved the girls, and again, they're the new kids. So yeah, these are not easy. These are not easy things for an adult to go through. My girls are 12 and 14, so I think this is hard for me. Imagine what it's like for my 12 and 14-year-old. So yeah, I hope that what it shows us all as a family is that we can adapt as long as we, keep an open mind and look for other options. Don't get too fixed into how we think things should be, but remain open to how things could be. That's what I hope we take away from it.
Be in Malaysia now, you feel like a little bit more settled. It's a place for you to be for a little while.
Great here. It feels great here. And I've said to my girls, this will be your last time being the new kids. So our intention is to stay now. It's really important now. It's really important. My eldest daughter has only 4 years left of school. It's really important that to me and to my husband that we can give them that stability of knowing that this is the last time being new kids. We're here now. As soon as we got here, we felt very comfortable. It felt very easy. It was a very soft landing to come here to Malaysia, and comfortable is the word. We feel really comfortable here. Yeah, it's a good feeling.
How did you navigate like the foods in all the different places? Were the girls pretty adaptable in with the local cuisines, or was that a little bit more challenging?
No, we paid them. In China, we would pay them a little bit to try new food all the time. The food for us, especially when we first got to China, was really challenging. Our girls had not grown up on an Asian diet in Australia. And, like we didn't know where to buy sausages. They love sausages. We couldn't find sausages. We didn't know, when we went to KFC, our first morning in China, we were like, let's just find something that's familiar. And there was a KFC down the road, and we went in there, and the burger buns were all black, or you could get a black or you could get a green burger bun, and the kids were like, not having it. No, what's with this KFC? This is not good. I just want chips and nuggets. So the food was really challenging. In Malaysia, it's fine. In Bali, it was fine actually, and it got really easy in China too. But like the initial landing was hard. But now we're spoiled. We're so spoiled. The food's here is amazing, incredible.
That's awesome. And is there anything that stood out to you, just observations in watching any of the local mums or parents, how they, something different, something that you sort of took away and thought, oh, that's an interesting approach? Is there anything that stuck with you in any of these places?
I think, like we were talking about before, with some of the pressure that some families feel with their children from such a young age to curate this profile of their child, I hadn't experienced that in Australia, so that surprised me. And I do have a very dear, lovely Korean friend who purposely moved her child out of the Korean system to an international school to try to escape what she said was intense pressure to have everything organised and really locked down from a young age for her daughter. So that was eye-opening for me to see how the pressure that I think sometimes I wonder if sometimes we can, in the West, I just wonder if sometimes we can poo-poo the tiger mum stereotype without recognising that that's often a mum who may not necessarily want that level of rigour for their child, but who maybe feels like there's no other choice and wants their child to have, I wonder that if sometimes we skim over the good intentions that parent will often have and write them off as a tiger mum. So that's something. Hello.
Say hello. Got a dirty face from all her yogurt in her feet up, but don't you? Dirty little face. And just finally, I could talk to you forever. So many questions. What advice would you have for other parents that sort of want to do that, want to move around every couple of years and give their child an experience in different places? Is there anything you would wish you'd known when you kind of embarked on that?
I will say this as an educator and a mum of children with neurodiversity. I will say that the advice I would give is to be very clear about what your children's needs are and look and look and advocate for that. And look very carefully, because some schools will really market themselves as being inclusive because it's a good marketing tactic, but may not have the resources or the skills within their team to provide proper inclusion. And that can be really detrimental, not only for the child, but for their family. So I would say, if you are the parent of a child with any sort of additional needs, really make sure that you know, though, you understand those needs and have a really clear idea about what sort of differentiation and accommodations or maybe modifications that child might need in the educational setting, and then target that and hold firm on that. And don't negotiate that too much, because especially if you're coming from a place like the US or Australia, our students are entitled to a lot of services, you know, like IEPs, individual educational plans in the US are mandated by law. Schools and teachers must follow those provision plans for students. It's not like that internationally, though. So that's my strong advice, and that's coming from an educator and a mum.
Yeah, it's good advice. I'd love to talk to you in another time just about those special needs and what to look for, and even what to identify in your own kids that may be indicators that they need that little bit of extra support. So I'm so glad we got to catch up. This is so exciting.
It was good.
Yeah. And I hope we can cross paths in person at some point in the travels. That would be amazing.
Yeah, let me know if you're coming to Malaysia.
Yeah, I'd love to. I haven't been to Malaysia, would love to go. Certainly, it's on my radar. I love Asia. It hasn't been a huge focus of my work. A lot of it's, Middle East, or my next trip will probably be Africa, but I love Asia. I've done work in Burma and sort of Thailand, but Cambodia, I've got friends in Laos. There's just so many places that I just would love to go to. And such beautiful people and such history. And so definitely, Raven is a couple of years older. I think when she can take it in, I think that will be really, really cool place to go.
Yeah.
Awesome.
100%.
Thank you for your time, and give my love to all your family. And I look forward to catching up again soon.
Absolutely. Keep in touch, hey?
I will. Thank you.
See you. Bye, Raven.
The light switch now.